That engine had defeated 6 certified technicians over 4 days. It had brought the head of engineering at Heritage Classic Motors to sign a failure report with a hand that wasn't entirely steady. A man with a master's degree from MIT and 17 years of professional credentials behind his name. It had nearly swallowed a $5.3 million contract hole. The kind that takes 3 years to build and 1 weekend to almost lose, and then at 11 on a Thursday night. A man in a faded gray Carhartt jacket walked into the service bay. His hands still carried the faint trace of engine oil from the afternoon shift he'd finished 4 hours earlier. His 6-year-old son was asleep in the truck parked outside. A small red toy toolbox tucked under one arm. The man walked to the car without greeting anyone. Without asking any questions, he stood in front of the engine for a long moment, very still, and then he said quietly, and without any drama at all, "I know where the problem is. What happens when the man everyone dismissed is the only one who can save everything?" The man walked to the car without greeting anyone, without asking any questions. He stood in front of the engine for a long moment, very still, and then he said quietly, and without any drama at all, "I know where the problem is. What happens when the man everyone dismissed is the only one who can save everything?" The garage was called Williams Auto Repair, and it sat on the eastern edge of Richmond, where the streets got quieter and the buildings got shorter, and nobody wore a tie. It was a 2-bay operation in a building that had been a furniture repair shop in a previous life. And it still had the old smell of sawdust underneath the newer smell of motor oil and brake fluid. The sign out front was hand-painted. The lift was second-hand. But every tool on the wall hung in its exact place, sorted by function and by size, and the floor was swept clean at the end of every working day without exception. Robert Williams ran the shop the way he ran everything, without announcement, without decoration, and with a precision that most people who came in for an oil change never noticed, and never needed to. Rob was 36 years old, and looked it in the honest way that comes from working with your hands in all weather. He was tall and lean with dark brown hair, and a face that didn't offer much away unless you knew how to look. He didn't talk much to customers beyond what the job required. He didn't explain himself. He didn't volunteer his history. When people asked how long he'd been doing this, he said a few years, which was technically true if you counted only the years at Williams Auto Repair, and ignored everything that came before. In the bottom drawer of the wooden desk in the corner, the desk that held the shop's invoice book and a battery-operated radio and not much else, there was a folded document in a manila envelope. It was a certificate of appointment from Velocity Dynamics, an American mechanical engineering firm based in Detroit that consulted for high-performance automotive manufacturers, naming Robert Williams as chief engine architect at the age of 31. The youngest in the company's history. The envelope had not been opened in 3 years. In the corner of the shop, on a wooden stool with a cushion tied to the seat, sat Lucas. He was 6 years old, and serious in the way that small children sometimes are when they have been paying close attention to the world for their entire short lives. He had his father's dark eyes, and his mother's habit of going quiet when something was bothering him. Every afternoon after school, he came to the shop, sat on the stool, and opened his red toy toolbox. A battered plastic thing with a yellow latch that he had owned since he was 3. He would lay out the toy wrench and the toy screwdriver and the toy ratchet on the floor in front of him. And then he would crouch over whatever piece of scrap metal Rob had set aside for him and pretend to work. He took it seriously. He always had. On the shelf above Rob's desk, beside the radio and the invoice book, there was a thick notebook with a brown leather cover. It was filled front to back in Rob's handwriting. Notes on classic American V8 engines, hand-drawn diagrams, annotated references, the accumulated record of 3 years of independent research. On the inside cover, in the same careful hand, was a single line for Sarah beside it, smaller, almost invisible, and for whoever comes after. Lucas noticed the Heritage Classic Motors banner through the shop window one afternoon, while Rob was finishing a brake job on a sedan. The boy pressed his nose against the glass and studied the photograph of the cars. Then he looked back at his father. "Dad, do you think you could fix those?" Rob glanced at the banner. He didn't answer. He turned back to the brake caliper and kept working. Across town on the main boulevard, where the buildings had glass facades and the parking valet wore matching blazers, Heritage Classic Motors occupied a full city block. The banner stretched across the upper story of the building read Private Exhibition, Special Classic Collection, Friday, 7 p.m. It was the most important event on Jessica Hayes' calendar for the year, and it had been for the past 8 months. Jessica was 32 years old and ran Heritage Classic Motors with the kind of focused intensity that made her good at her job and occasionally difficult to be around. She had taken over the dealership from her father at 28, rebuilt the clientele in 3 years, and positioned Heritage Classic as the premier destination for classic and collector vehicles on the eastern seaboard. She was precise. She was demanding, and she did not believe in second chances for people who wasted her time. She also had not slept properly in 4 days. The 1970 Plymouth Hemi Cuda had been built in limited numbers and was one of fewer than 600 ever made. The specific example in Heritage Classic Motors service bay had been modified in the 1990s by an American engineer named Raymond Castellano, who had worked for a small California firm that specialized in the mechanical restoration of pre-emissions era high-performance automobiles. Castellano had died in 2004, and he had left behind no written documentation of his modifications, no drawings, no service manuals, no annotated schematics. What he had left behind was a 426 cubic inch V8 engine that ran by all accounts better than the day it left the factory. Until 4 days ago, when it had simply stopped, not gradually, without warning. It had stopped between one firing cycle and the next, as completely as if someone had switched it off, at a source that no diagnostic instrument could locate. Edward Cross, who owned the car and 9 others in the collection he had placed on consignment with Heritage Classic Motors, had called Jessica personally. His voice had been calm. That was worse than shouting. If the Cuda was not running and on display by Friday at 7 p.m., he said he would withdraw the consignment agreement in its entirety. 5.3 million in inventory. Gone. The exhibition. Heritage Classic's most visible event in 3 years. Reduced to a gap on a platform. And a conversation that Jessica did not want to have. 6 of Heritage Classic's certified technicians had worked on the Cuda, one after another, and then in combinations. Over 4 days, none of them found the fault. The diagnostic system produced contradictory error codes that pointed in 3 different directions simultaneously, and resolved none of them. Kenneth Porter, who had spent the better part of the 4th day under the hood, wrote in his technical report, "Engine unrecoverable. Recommend client notification of irreversible mechanical failure." Jessica read the report, set it face down on her desk, and called 3 independent specialists. The first declined when he heard the car's name and year. "Too complex," he said. "Not enough documentation." The second quoted a timeline of 8 weeks, and a fee that started at $500,000. The third drove in from 2 hours away, walked around the Cuda for 15 minutes in the service bay, and then walked back to his car and drove home. He called Jessica from the road. "I don't know what Castellano did to that engine," he said. "And because I don't know, I can't fix it without risking making it worse. I'm sorry." Jessica stood alone in the service bay after the call ended. The Cuda sat under the shop lights in its vitamin C orange paint, which was the color of something expensive and unapologetic. She put one hand on the hood and looked at it for a long time. It was Monday evening. Friday was 4 days away. On Monday morning, Rob drove to Heritage Classic Motors to pick up a parts order. He did this because the specific component he needed, a fuel delivery valve for a '73 Corvette he was restoring for a private client, was only available through a supplier that Heritage Classic Motors imported exclusively, and the wait time for a direct order was 6 weeks. Rob had called ahead. He had a confirmation number. He brought Lucas because school didn't start until 9, and it was only a quick pickup. He wore what he always wore: work pants, steel-toed boots, a clean but well-worn jacket. Lucas carried his red toolbox, as he almost always did when they went anywhere together, the way other children carry stuffed animals. The showroom floor of Heritage Classic Motors was everything Williams Auto Repair was not: high ceilings, recessed lighting, cars displayed like sculpture on platforms of polished concrete. The staff moved in quiet clusters and spoke at the volume of a library. Rob went to the parts counter, gave his confirmation number, and waited. Lucas stood beside him and looked up at a silver '62 Corvette on the nearest platform, with an expression of pure, uncomplicated awe. Kenneth Porter came through the door behind the counter before the parts clerk could respond to the confirmation number. He was the head of technical services at Heritage Classic Motors, 40 years old, broad-shouldered. With the particular confidence of a man who had never in his professional life been told he was wrong by anyone whose opinion he respected, he looked at Rob once. From the top of his head to the toes of his boots, with the efficient thoroughness of a man cataloging something he intends to discard. Then he looked at Lucas. And at the red plastic toolbox, he said loudly enough for the nearest cluster of staff and the two customers browsing the showroom floor to hear without difficulty. This counter isn't a walk-in service desk for backyard mechanics. If you need parts, there's an auto supply warehouse on Route 1. He paused for exactly long enough to make the next part land. And bringing your kid to a place like this again. And I'll have security escort you out. This isn't a playground. The showroom went quiet in the small specific way that spaces go quiet when something has happened that everyone present has decided not to acknowledge. One of the browsing customers turned slightly away. A staff member near the far wall found something on her clipboard to look at. Lucas stopped looking at the Corvette. He looked down at the red toolbox in his hands instead. And then he pressed it against his chest. Rob did not raise his voice. He did not change his expression. He looked at Kenneth Porter for approximately 2 seconds, a look that was flat, still, and somehow more uncomfortable than anger would have been. And then he looked at Lucas. He said nothing to Kenneth. He simply waited at the counter until the parts clerk, clearly wanting the interaction to end, processed the confirmation number, and brought the component from the warehouse. Rob signed for it, tucked the box under his arm, and walked to the door. Lucas fell in beside him, just before they reached the exit. Lucas said quietly, "Dad, let's go," and they did, on the second floor, behind the long window that overlooked the showroom floor. Jessica Hayes had watched the exchange. She had seen Kenneth's performance, and she had seen the man in work clothes, and she had seen the small boy with the red plastic box pressed to his chest. She had not intervened. She had looked back at her phone. She had walked away. She told herself it was because she hadn't heard everything clearly. She would think about that later. In the dark. In the quiet of the shop floor on Thursday night. And she would know that wasn't true. On Monday evening, Rob drove home, collected Lucas from the neighbor who had picked him up from school, and made dinner for the two of them. Pasta, a green salad, a glass of water for himself, and apple juice for the boy. They ate at the small kitchen table with the window open to the backyard. Lucas was quieter than usual. He ate his pasta in careful, measured forkfuls, and didn't ask for a second serving afterward. They sat on the back step with the last of the daylight. Lucas turning his toy screwdriver over in his hands. He had been thinking since the morning. Rob could tell because the boy had his mother's thinking face, a slight downward pull at the corners of his mouth, a stillness in the eyes. Finally, Lucas asked, "Dad, why did that man talk to you like that?" Rob looked out over the yard where a maple tree was just beginning to turn at the edges. He let the question sit for a moment. He didn't know who he was talking to. Lucas was quiet for a beat. "Dumbs that make it okay." "No," Rob said. "It doesn't." Lucas turned the screwdriver over again. "Why didn't you say anything back?" Rob reached over and put a hand on the boy's shoulder. Briefly, the way he touched things he cared about without performance, without excess. Some things don't need to be said. They only need to be done. Lucas looked at him. He was 6, and there was a limit to what 6 years of living could do with a statement like that. But he nodded, because he trusted his father in the wordless, complete way that children trust the people who have never once given them a reason not to. There was a pause, and then Lucas asked something else. Something Rob hadn't expected. "Dad, are we poor?" Rob turned to look at him fully. The question hung there, simple, direct. The kind of thing a 6-year-old asks because he doesn't yet know how loaded it is. Where'd that come from? Lucas kept his eyes on the screwdriver. "That man said we don't belong in the nice place." Rob felt his chest ache, like something was pressing down on his ribs. "We're not rich, Lucas. But we're not poor. We have what we need." He paused. "And nobody gets to tell you where you belong based on what you're wearing, or what your dad does us for work. You understand?" Lucas nodded. But Rob could see he was still processing it, turning it over in his head the way he turned the screwdriver over in his hands. "Your grandpa," Rob said. "My dad." Ran this shop for 40 years, honest work. Helped people. When he died, the whole neighborhood came to his funeral. Not because he was rich, because he was good. That's what matters. Lucas looked up at him. Do you miss him? Every day, Rob said. Same as I miss your mom. Lucas went very quiet. And then, do you think they're proud of us? Rob didn't answer right away. He pulled Lucas close, one arm around the boy's shoulders. I know they are, inside. After Lucas was asleep, Rob stood at the kitchen shelf and looked at the brown leather notebook. He had not opened it in several months. It held, among other things, 47 pages of research on Raymond Castellano's engineering methodology, the culmination of 3 years of independent study that Rob had pursued alongside his work at Velocity Dynamics. During the years when he had still believed he would one day write something definitive and useful about the way certain engineers understood machines as acoustic systems rather than purely mechanical ones, Castellano had been the greatest of these. He had designed engines the way composers write for string quartets, each component calibrated for resonance, for the specific frequency at which the whole assembly would operate as a single coherent system. Rather than a collection of individual parts, the research had begun as professional interest. It had become something close to obsession. And then Sarah had died on a Tuesday afternoon in November, on a road she drove every day. And Rob had closed the notebook and put it on the shelf, and driven himself and a 3-year-old Lucas back to this town where he had grown up, and opened the shop, because there was a boy who needed a father who was present, and Rob Williams, above all things, knew how to be present. He stood there now, one hand on the notebook's spine, thinking, I'm 36 years old. 3 years ago, for everything. Corner office in Detroit, research budget, respect. Then Sarah died and I came home, opened Dad's shop, changed oil, rotated tires. Some nights I wake up at 3 a.m. and wonder, did I waste it, the knowledge? The research, Sarah used to say, you have a gift, Rob. Don't bury it. But she also said Lucas needs you. Can't do both. Or maybe I'm just scared. Scared that if I open this notebook, I'll see how much time passed. How much I'll never get back. He took his hand off the notebook, turned away, went to bed. Tuesday brought no progress for Jessica. She brought in a restoration team from Norfolk, specialists with a strong reputation for pre-war American vehicles. They worked through the day. That evening, their team leader sat across from Jessica in the conference room and was honest in the way that only people who are genuinely stumped can afford to be. Whatever Castellano did to that engine, he said, he did it according to a logic that doesn't exist in any documentation I've ever encountered. The modifications are there. We can see them. But we don't understand the system they create. We're afraid to go further without that understanding, because the wrong move could cause irreversible damage. He paused. I think the person who can fix this engine is someone who has spent a great deal of time specifically studying how Castellano worked. Castellano himself, on Wednesday morning, Kenneth Porter proposed using a substitute vehicle, a Cuda from 1969. That was close enough in appearance that most guests at the exhibition would not know the difference. Jessica rejected this in under 10 seconds. That's not Edward's car, she said. It's not what we agreed to display. We don't do that. Kenneth gave her a long look. She gave it back without blinking, and he left the room. Jessica was not a sentimental person, and she was not particularly given to principle for its own sake. But there were lines she did not cross in business. She had watched her father cross them, and she had watched what they cost him in the end, and she had decided early that her version of Heritage Classic Motors would not be built that way. Her father, Richard Hayes, had died 2 years ago. But the lessons had come earlier, much earlier. She remembered the hospital room, her father at 67, dying of lung cancer 3 days before the end. I made mistakes, Nat, he'd said, his voice thin. Cut corners, thought I was being smart. You know what it cost, your reputation? No. He'd gripped her hand. My integrity. Reputation you can rebuild. Integrity. Once it's gone, it's gone. His eyes had been fierce even then. Don't be me. Do it right, even when it's hard. He'd died 3 days later, and Jessica had taken over the dealership, with those words carved into her like a scar. On Thursday morning, Amanda Chen set a single sheet of paper on Jessica's desk and stood back without saying anything. The paper had 2 items on it. The first was a name, Robert Williams, Williams Auto Repair, followed by an address on the east side of town. Below the name, Amanda had written in her precise small handwriting what a contact in the industry had told her. Robert Williams, former chief engine architect, Velocity Dynamics, left the company 3 years ago, has not returned to the industry. He wrote the most comprehensive existing analysis of Raymond Castellano's engineering methodology, an unpublished thesis that is cited in 2 academic papers and 1 industry journal. Currently operates a one-man auto repair shop. Single father, Jessica read the page twice. She looked at Amanda. This is the man from Monday. It was not a question. Amanda said nothing. She didn't need to. Jessica looked out the window for a moment and then said, set up a meeting for tonight. She paused. I'll go myself. Rob was finishing the last job of the day. A routine coolant flush on a pickup truck. When he heard footsteps behind him that didn't belong in his shop, heels on concrete have a specific sound. And that sound had no business being in Williams' Auto Repair at 8:30 on a Thursday evening. He rolled out from under the truck and stood up. Jessica Hayes was standing in the doorway of the bay, her jacket still on, her dark hair pulled back, a leather portfolio under one arm. Amanda stood a step behind her. Rob recognized Jessica immediately. She was the woman on the second floor, the one who had looked down at the showroom and then looked away. She recognized him too. He could see it in the slight adjustment in her posture. An acknowledgement that she owed him something she wasn't entirely sure how to pay. Jessica did not waste time on preamble. I have a 1970 Plymouth Hemi Cuda with a modified V8 engine. Non-standard modifications, no documentation. 6 technicians, 2 outside teams, 4 days. Nobody can fix it. The exhibition is tomorrow at 7 p.m. I need you. Rob wiped his hands on a shop rag and looked at her. He did not rush to fill the silence. After a moment, Jessica said more quietly, I know you came to our facility on Monday. I know what happened. I was there, and I didn't stop it. That was wrong of me. She didn't elaborate. She wasn't a woman who expanded on apologies, but she had said it plainly, and she meant it. And Rob heard both things, the words, and the fact of them. What did your technicians do to it? She described the 4 days in detail. Every attempt, every instrument used, every proposed solution. Rob listened without interruption. When she was finished, he asked one question. Who modified the engine last? An engineer named Castellano, Jessica said. Raymond Castellano. He died in 2004. For the first time since she had walked through the door, something changed in Rob's face. A small thing. A stillness becoming a different kind of stillness. You know him? Jessica said. I know his work, Rob said. There's a difference. He glanced across the bay to where Lucas was curled on the wooden stool under a blanket, asleep, with the red plastic toolbox held loosely in one small hand. He looked at it for a moment. Then he looked back at Jessica Castellano, the Cuda, the work I walked away from. It's like the universe is asking, are you done? Are you really done? Or was this just a long pause? But if I say yes, I'm opening that door again. The door I closed when Sarah died. The door to the life I left behind. I'll come and look at it, he said. I'm not making any promises. He locked the shop, drove Lucas to Eleanor Brennan's house 3 streets over. Eleanor was 68 and had watched Lucas through 2 bouts of the flu and a broken collarbone and a phase where he would only eat beige foods. And she opened the door without a word, took one look at the bag of tools Rob was carrying, and nodded, and took Lucas inside. Rob drove to Heritage Classic Motors. The service bay was empty except for the 3 of them, and the car. The Cuda sat under the overhead lights in its deep orange paint, and even standing still in a fluorescent-lit workshop, it had a quality that was difficult to name. Something about the proportions, the low and aggressive stance, the way the light moved across the long hood. Rob stood in front of it for a long moment without touching it. Then he walked around it once, slowly, his hands at his sides. Then again Jessica watched from a stool she had pulled to the far end of the bay. She had folded her jacket over her lap, and she sat with the particular stillness of someone exercising restraint. Amanda stood near the door. Kenneth Porter had been in the building when Rob arrived. He had seen who Jessica had called in, and he had left without saying anything, his expression carrying the specific quality of contempt that is shading over into something else. And hasn't quite decided what. Rob opened the hood. He looked at the engine without touching it, just looked, the way he looked at everything before he touched it, which was the first habit he had developed when he was young, and which he had never lost. Then he reached into his bag. and took out a modified stethoscope, the chest piece replaced with a small metal probe. The tubing extended, the earpieces cushioned. He began placing the probe against the engine block, systematically moving from point to point in a pattern that made no immediate sense from the outside, but was in fact a precise sequence derived from diagrams in the brown leather notebook. Now open on the workbench beside him, he listened. The bay was silent enough that the only sounds were the faint tick of cooling metal and the occasional distant noise from the street. Jessica held her position for 20 minutes. Then she stood up and walked halfway toward the car. "Have you found something?" Rob said without looking up. "Not yet. But I know what I'm looking for." She asked what that was, and he straightened slightly and told her Castellano didn't engineer conventionally. He engineered acoustically. Every component was calibrated to resonate at a specific frequency, so that the system as a whole operated as a single harmonic unit. If one component is displaced even fractionally from its designed position, the resonance breaks, and the whole system shuts down, instantly. There's no error code for it, because no diagnostic software was ever written to measure it. You'd have to know it was possible before you could look for it. Jessica let that settle. "Where did you learn that?" "I spent 3 years studying Castellano's work," Rob said, returning to the stethoscope. "I was going to write a thesis about it." "What happened?" She asked it quietly. The way you ask a question when you already suspect the answer might be something you don't have the right to hear. "My wife died," Rob said after that. "I wasn't interested in writing anymore." He said it the same way he said everything. The plain weight of the fact. Jessica looked at the Cuda's engine and said nothing. It was 1 a.m. when he found it. He had removed the 4th layer of the fuel delivery assembly, working with the patience of someone who understands that urgency and speed are not the same thing. And there, tucked between the primary and secondary fuel rails, was a wafer-thin thermal isolation plate that had no business being there according to any factory specification. Castellano had fabricated it himself from a titanium alloy, approximately 2 millimeters in thickness, positioned with tolerances measured in tenths of a millimeter. One of the previous technicians, almost certainly while attempting to investigate the fuel delivery system, had displaced it by 0.3 of a millimeter, enough to break the resonance, enough to kill the engine as completely as a power cut. But it wasn't just displacement. Rob could see that now. The plate also had a hairline fatigue crack, running along one edge. 30 years of thermal cycling, expansion, contraction, the metal finally giving way. The technician's handling had been the final stress. The crack had spread. The thermal barrier had failed. Fuel vaporized inconsistently. The harmonic frequencies here collapsed. The whole system had refused to fire. Rob straightened up and looked at the plate in the light. "The problem is here," he said. "This piece needs to be refabricated and repositioned. The original has been microfractured, probably when it was moved, and it won't hold." Jessica looked at him for a second. "It's 1 a.m. "I know. I need 40 grams of titanium alloy and a handheld grinder with a fine-grade wheel." She picked up her phone. It took her 40 minutes. 3 phone calls and a $200 surcharge to a 24-hour metal fabrication shop across town. But she got it. Rob worked for 2 more hours. He fabricated the replacement plate on the workbench, using the grinder, the original as a template, and calipers that measured in hundredths of a millimeter. He checked the thickness at 11 points. He checked it again. Then he recreated the assembly, layer by layer. Each component returned to its exact position in the sequence he had documented before disassembly. His hands did not rush. His hands never rushed. They moved with the particular efficiency of someone who had performed 10,000 versions of this motion, and no longer needed to think about any of them. Jessica watched without speaking. At some point, Amanda had quietly brought 2 coffees from a machine somewhere in the building, and left one on the bench near Rob, and one near Jessica, and retreated without comment. This is what I'm good at. Understanding systems, seeing what others miss. 3 years of oil changes and tire rotations. Honest work. But this work feels different. Maybe I didn't have to choose. Father and engineer, maybe I forgot I could be both. At 3:45 in the morning, Rob closed the engine cover, set down his tools, and looked at the Cuda SCART it. Jessica climbed into the driver's seat. She put the key in the ignition She turned it, the 426 cubic inch Hemi V8 engine turned over, caught, and opened into a sound that filled the service bay completely. A deep, even authoritative bellow. That settled immediately into a low, resonant idle. It was the sound of something that knew exactly what it was. Jessica sat in the driver's seat with both hands on the wheel. Eyes closed for a long moment. When she opened them, Rob was wiping down his tools and placing them one by one back in the bag. He was at the door with his bag over his shoulder before Jessica got out of the car. "I'll send an invoice by email," he said. "My rates are standard. The parts cost is on top. I need to know what to pay you," she said. "You'll get what I send." She stood there, looking at him. And then she said, "How did you know it would work?" Rob stopped, turned back. I didn't. But I knew the theory was sound. And I knew I'd done the work correctly. That's not the same as knowing." Rob looked at her directly, his voice quiet but certain. "It's called faith. In the work. In yourself." He looked at Lucas, asleep on the stool he had brought in after midnight, and Eleanor had carried him inside, and settled him there without being asked. And then he picked Lucas up, settled the boy against his shoulder, and picked up the red toolbox in the same hand. Lucas stirred but did not wake. Rob walked to his truck in the pre-dawn dark, buckled Lucas into the back seat, and drove home. He got there at 6:15. He drank a coffee at the kitchen table in the quiet house, while the street outside slowly filled with the sounds of a neighborhood waking up. He was still there when Lucas came downstairs at 6:45, blinking and confused. Still in the clothes he'd gone to sleep in. "Dad, where did we go?" "I fixed a car." Lucas said it as a statement of what he expected from his father's nights. "A nice one." "Yes," Rob said. "I think you'd like it." Lucas climbed into the chair beside him and leaned against Rob's arm. "Was it like Detroit?" "When you worked there?" Rob was surprised Lucas remembered. "A little bit." "Yeah. Did you like it?" Rob thought about that, about the sound of the engine firing, about the way his hands had remembered every motion, about the notebook open on the workbench. "I did." "You gonna do it again?" Rob looked at his son, 6 years old, and already asking the questions that mattered. "I don't know yet." Lucas nodded, as if that was a perfectly acceptable answer. "And maybe it was, Mrs. Brennan says you used to smile more. In Detroit, you should do that work again if it makes you happy." "I'll be okay." Rob pulled him close, his throat tightening. "You're what's important. Don't forget that." "I know, Dad. But you can be important too." Rob didn't say anything to that, because there wasn't anything to say. His 6-year-old son had just given him permission to be whole. And Rob didn't know what to do with it, so he just held him and finished his coffee and tried not to think about the brown leather notebook sitting on the shelf, or the sound of a Hemi engine firing at 3:45 in the morning, or the fact that for the first time in 3 years, he'd felt like himself. Amanda Chen put a tablet in front of Jessica at 7:30 that Friday morning. Before Jessica had finished her first coffee, on the screen was an article from an automotive engineering journal, dated 2018. The headline read, "Velocity Dynamics appoints Robert Williams as chief engine architect." Youngest in company history, the photograph showed Rob in a suit, standing beside an engine prototype, facing a bank of cameras, with the expression of a man who would rather be working on the engine than standing next to it for a photograph. Below the article, Amanda had pulled up a citation from an academic paper on pre-emissions American powertrains, a paper from 2020. That referenced in a footnote an unpublished research thesis by Robert Williams of Velocity Dynamics Research Division, described as the most thorough existing analysis of Raymond Castellano's engineering methodology. Amanda said quietly, "He didn't just know about Castellano. He is the foremost living authority on Castellano's work." Jessica set down her coffee cup. She looked at the photograph for a long time. The younger face, the same flat, steady eyes, the same hands that even in a posed photograph looked like they were resting rather than performing. She thought about the man in the work jacket at the parts counter on Monday morning, the boy with the red plastic toolbox, the way Rob had looked at Kenneth Porter for exactly 2 seconds and said nothing and walked out. She thought about all the things that look had contained and all the things he hadn't needed to say. She picked up her coffee again. "Where is Kenneth?" Amanda told her. "Shes him in." Kenneth Porter entered Jessica's office at 8 a.m., expecting discussion about last night. Maybe praise for staying late, showing dedication. Even though he'd left before the work was done, Jessica was behind her desk, No preamble. Effective immediately. You're reassigned from technical director to senior technician. 2 levels down, same facility, different responsibilities. You'll report to Michael Torres. Kenneth stood there, processing. Then, because of last night, because I questioned bringing in, Jessica cut him off. Her voice measured. Cold because of Monday. You publicly humiliated a customer on my premises. That customer turned out to be the only person in the relevant professional world capable of fixing the problem you declared unfixable. She paused. Your engineering degree is impressive. Your credentials are real, but you let arrogance override judgment. And you cost this company nearly $5.3 million in contracts. Because you couldn't see past your own assessment. Kenneth's jaw tightened. I followed every protocol, every diagnostic procedure. Protocols don't account for things you don't know exist. Jessica's voice stayed quiet. Rob knew they look for acoustic resonance failure. Spent 3 years studying it. You didn't know, so you declared it impossible. That's understandable. She stood up, dismissing him on sight, treating him like he had no right to be in our building. That's something else. She let that settle. My father taught me something before he died. The difference between a good leader and a failed one isn't avoiding mistakes. It's what you do after. You made a mistake Monday, a serious one. How you handle this demotion will determine whether you're worth keeping at all. Kenneth stood there, jaw set. He didn't argue, because there wasn't anything to argue. He knew what he had done. He knew what it had cost. Is that all? That's all. He left. Jessica sat back down, picked up her coffee, and allowed herself exactly 30 seconds to feel satisfied, before moving on to the next thing, which was the exhibition. 7 hours away, Rob's invoice arrived at 4:47 a.m. As promised, parts, $340. Labor, 6 hours at $125 per hour. $750 total. $1,090. The number was reasonable in the way that invoices of people who are very good at things and have stopped needing to charge what they're worth tend to be reasonable. Jessica looked at it for a moment, did the math. Then she opened her banking application and transferred $5,000 into the account listed. She did not include a note. She assumed he would understand. He did. He saw the notification while he was halfway through pulling the engine on a '99 Camry that had come in that morning. And he looked at the number on the screen, and he felt something that was not surprise. He had expected something like this from Jessica Hayes, whom he had assessed correctly in the first 20 minutes. And then he put the phone in his pocket and went back to the engine because there was work to do. And the work didn't care about anything else. Lucas was at school. Eleanor would pick him up at 3. Rob had the day to himself, which meant 6 brake jobs, 2 oil changes, and 1 transmission flush that was going to take most of the afternoon normal work. The kind he'd been doing for 3 years. Except his hands remembered last night. The precision of fabricating that plate, the satisfaction of hearing the engine fire, the way the whole system had come together. Harmonic. Complete. He couldn't stop thinking about it. The exhibition that Friday evening was everything it was meant to be. Heritage Classic Motors' main floor was remade into something between a gallery and a concert hall. Warm light, careful spacing between cars. A string quartet in the corner, playing something that sounded expensive. The guests came in their good clothes and moved slowly between the vehicles, with the particular reverence that expensive, beautiful things tend to produce in people who can afford them, at the center of the display. On the raised platform in the middle of the room, the 1970 Plymouth Hemi Cuda sat in its vitamin C orange paint, under a light that had been angled specifically to catch the curves of the hood. Its engine was running. The sound it produced was barely audible in the room, a low, settled vibration that you felt more in your chest than heard with your ears. But it was there, and it was perfect. And every person in the room who knew anything about these cars knew what it meant that it was there. Edward Cross arrived at 7:15, 20 minutes past the start time, the way men of his particular standing arrive at events, unhurried, aware that the room will wait. He was 72, white-haired, and had the bearing of someone who had spent 60 years surrounded by things of exceptional quality, and had developed the ability to recognize them without effort. He walked straight to the Cuda and put his hand on the hood above the engine and felt the vibration. and stood there for a moment with an expression that was not public. Then he found Jessica. You did it. Not an accusation, not excessive praise. Simply a statement from a man who had not entirely believed it would be done. I had help. Edward looked at her carefully. He had done business with Jessica for 3 years, and he had never heard her use that particular word in relation to herself. Who, Robert Williams? Edward went still for the span of 3 seconds. Then he said slowly, the Williams who wrote the Castellano thesis. Yes, good God. He looked at the CUDA, and then back at her. I read that thesis before it was even finished. A colleague at Velocity sent me 40 pages of it as a draft. I thought whoever wrote it must have spent half a lifetime on it. He paused. What is he doing now? He has a small shop, Jessica said. East side of Richmond. He does general repair work. Edward looked at her with an expression that was difficult to read, somewhere between sadness and admiration, aimed at life itself, and the strange arrangements it produced. Life is strange, isn't it? Man with that mind doing brake jobs and oil changes. He paused, looking at the CUDA, the engine rumbling. Perfect. Maybe he knows something we don't. Maybe he figured out what matters before the rest of us did. He looked at Jessica. I'm 72 years old. Spent my whole life collecting cars, building wealth, making deals. You know what I think about at night? Jessica waited. I think about my daughter, lives in Portland. I haven't seen her in 8 months. Too busy, too important. Too many deals to close. He looked back at the CUDA. Rob Williams left everything to raise his son. That's not failure, that's clarity. And then he walked away to rejoin the other guests, leaving Jessica standing there, thinking about her own father, and the hospital room, and the things he'd said about integrity. She stayed at the exhibition longer than the evening required, watching people admire the cars, listening to the string quartet, feeling the low rumble of the Hemi engine, and thinking. 3 days later, on Monday afternoon, a white envelope arrived at Williams Auto Repair by regular mail. Inside was a business card, heavy stock, plain, the name Edward Cross in small capital letters, with a phone number, and nothing else on the back. Handwritten, Rob. I've been looking for you since I read your Castellano thesis in 2019. Nobody could tell me where you'd gone. Now I know. When you're ready to talk, not about cars, but about what you still want to do, call me. I have a collection that needs someone who understands what Castellano understood. And I have resources to support research you might want to continue. No pressure, no timeline, just an open door. Edward Cross. Rob held the card for a moment. Then he put it on the shelf, beside the brown leather notebook, and he stood there, looking at both of them. For a long time that same day, another letter arrived, this one from Jessica, typed, formal, on Heritage Classic Motors letterhead, Robert. What you did Thursday night saved my company. More than that, it reminded me why I'm in this business. Not for money, for the integrity of doing things right. My father forgot that. I won't. If there's ever another problem I can't solve, and I'm certain there will be, I hope you'll take my call. Not as a favor, as a colleague. You proved you're the best at what you do. That deserves recognition. And respect, thank you. Jessica Hayes. Rob read both letters, set them on the shelf, next to Edward's card. Next to the notebook, 2 offers, 2 paths forward, and he had no idea what to do with either of them. Because part of him wanted to say yes to everything. To open the notebook, to call Edward, to take Jessica's calls, to step back into the world he'd left behind. But another part of him remembered why he'd left in the first place. Lucas, 3 years old, crying in the middle of the night, asking where mommy went, and Rob not having an answer that made sense to a 3-year-old. The decision he'd made then had been simple. Be there, be present, give Lucas stability, give him a father who wasn't flying to Detroit every week, who wasn't working 16-hour days, who was just there. And that decision had cost him everything else, his career, his research, the work he loved. So what was he supposed to do now? Lucas was 6. He was in school, he had friends, he had Eleanor, he had a routine that worked. Did that change the equation? Rob didn't know. On Sunday afternoon, Rob took Lucas to the waterfront, the Richmond harbor, where boats came and went, and people sat on benches and watched the water. Lucas had his red toolbox, as always, and he was examining the rigging on a sailboat docked nearby, with the kind of focus that made Rob think of Sarah. She'd been like that, able to concentrate completely on whatever was in front of her, shutting out the rest of the world. Lucas came back to the bench, sat down beside Rob. Dad, can I ask you something? Always. Why did you stop doing the fancy work? In Detroit, Rob wasn't expecting that. He turned to look at Lucas. What made you think about that? Mrs. Brennan said you used to be important. Like, really important. And then Mom died and you came back here. Rob's chest ached. Eleanor talks too much, but it's true. Right. Yeah, it's true. So why did you stop? Rob looked out at the water. A sailboat was coming into the harbor, sails down, motor running. Moving slow. Because you were 3 years old. You'd just lost your mother. You needed a father who was there, not someone flying to Detroit every week, working 16-hour days. You needed me present. Did you want to stop? Rob thought about lying, about saying it was fine, about protecting Lucas from the weight of it. But Lucas deserved the truth, even at 6. No, I love that work. Do you wish you were still doing it? Rob paused, long enough that Lucas looked up at him. Sometimes. Then why don't you? Rob pulled him close. Because I chose you. And I'd make that choice again, every single time. Lucas was quiet for a moment. And then he said something that Rob would remember for the rest of his life. Dad, Mrs. Brennan says Mom wouldn't want you to be sad all the time. Rob's breath caught. I'm not sad all the time, but you're sad some of the time. I can tell. Lucas looked up at him, 6 years old, with his mother's eyes, and a directness that shouldn't have been possible. Mrs. Brennan says you used to smile more. When you did the important work, you should do it again. I'll be okay. She can watch me more, and you'll come home. Right. Always. Then you should do it. Because I don't like it when you're sad. Rob couldn't speak for a moment. He just held Lucas and watched the sailboat dock and tried to process what his 6-year-old son had just said. Because Lucas hadn't given him permission to be whole. Lucas had told him he was allowed to be happy. And that was different. 2 weeks later, on a Monday morning, Rob made the call. He stood in the shop, Lucas at school, no customers yet, the phone in his hand, and he dialed Edward Cross's number. Edward answered on the second ring. Cross, Mr. Cross. This is Robert Williams. There was warmth in Edward's voice when he responded. Rob, I'm glad you called. I've been thinking about your offer. And Rob took a breath. I can't leave my shop. I have clients here. Lucas has school. His life is here. I understand. But I can do consulting work. Part-time. You bring the cars to me. I diagnose and repair. Or I come to you on weekends when Lucas is with Mrs. Brennan. I work on my schedule. You pay for expertise, not for me to uproot my life. Edward was quiet for a moment. Then that's more than fair. One more condition, name it. Sometimes I bring my son. He's 6. He's learning the trade. I want him to see this work. Learn from it. Edward's voice carried a smile. Rob, I'd be honored to have him. Then we have a deal. When can you start? Rob looked at the calendar on the wall, at the week ahead, at the life he'd built here, and the life he was stepping back into next Saturday. If that works, it works. I'll have the first car ready for you. They talked for a few more minutes, about logistics, about payment, about which car Edward wanted him to look at first. And when Rob hung up, he stood there in the quiet shop and felt something shift inside him, an integration, past and present. Father and engineer, Sarah would have told him that 3 years ago. If he'd been ready to hear it, Lucas had told him 2 weeks ago, and this time, he'd listened that evening. After Lucas was asleep, Rob went to the kitchen shelf and took down the brown leather notebook. He opened it for the first time in 3 years. The first page. Sarah's inscription for Rob, who understands engines like musicians understand sound. Love always. Sarah, below it. His own inscription for Sarah, for Lucas. For whoever needs to know that Castellano's engines weren't just powerful. They sang. Rob turned to a blank page at the back, picked up a pen, and wrote Sarah. I closed this notebook 3 years ago. I thought choosing to be Lucas's father meant giving up being an engineer. I was wrong. Lucas reminded me of that, in his 6-year-old way. He said I should do the work that makes me smile. So I'm opening this again, not to go back, but to move forward, with him. The work continues, and this time, I'm bringing our son with me. Rob closed the notebook, put it back on the shelf, but this time he put it face out, visible, not hidden. A week later, Kenneth Porter was working in the service bay at Heritage Classic Motors, senior technician now. 2 levels down from where he'd been, Michael Torres was his supervisor. A man 10 years younger than Kenneth, with half his credentials, and twice his humility. Kenneth had spent the first 3 days angry, the next 4 processing, and now, a week in, he was starting to understand. He'd been good at his job. That wasn't the problem. The problem was that he'd stopped being curious, stopped asking questions. started assuming that his way was the only way, and when someone had come along who knew something he didn't, instead of asking, instead of learning, he'd dismissed them. He'd dismissed Rob Williams, probably the best engineer he'd ever meet, because Rob wore work clothes and brought his kid to the showroom, and that dismissal had cost Heritage Classic nearly $5.3 million. And Kenneth, his position. Jessica had been clear about that. How you handle this determines whether you're worth keeping at all. So Kenneth was handling it. He was showing up, doing the work, keeping his mouth shut. And learning Michael Torres was patient, more patient than Kenneth deserved. And he was teaching Kenneth things, small things, about how to work with people, how to listen, how to admit when you don't know something. It was humbling. And it was exactly what Kenneth needed. He still thought about Monday morning sometimes, about the look on Rob's face, that 2-second stare, flat, still, uncomfortable. Rob hadn't needed to say anything. The look had said it all. You don't know who you're talking to, and you're about to find out. Kenneth had found out, and now he was learning to be better. Jessica received the call from Amanda on a Tuesday afternoon. "We have a problem." Jessica looked up from her desk. "What kind of problem?" "Client just brought in a 71 Boss 429 Mustang. Numbers matching, original everything. Engine won't fire. They've had it to 3 shops. Nobody can diagnose it." Jessica felt something click into place. "Let me guess. Raymond Castellano's work." Amanda nodded. "How did you know?" "Because it's always Castellano." Jessica stood up. "Get Rob Williams on the phone." She called Rob. He answered on the 3rd ring. "Williams Auto Repair, Rob." "It's Jessica Hayes. Heritage Classic Motors." There was a pause. Then, "What can I do for you?" "We have a 71 Boss 429 Mustang. Castellano's work. Engine won't fire. Can you take a look?" Rob was quiet for a moment. Then, "Quinnell wants it done by Friday. I know that's short notice. I can come Thursday evening. After I close the shop." "You sure?" Yeah. "I'm sure, thank you, Jessica." She paused. "Yes, this is going to keep happening. Castellano cars. Problems nobody else can solve. You're going to keep calling me." "I know. So let's set something up. Consulting arrangement. You bring me the cars. I diagnose and fix them. You pay me for my time. We both know what we're getting into." Jessica felt a smile tug at the corner of her mouth. "I'd like that. Good. I'll see you Thursday." He hung up, and Jessica sat there, looking at her phone, thinking about how strange it was that the man Kenneth had dismissed 2 weeks ago was now the most valuable consultant Heritage Classic had. Life was funny that way. On Thursday evening, Rob drove to Heritage Classic Motors, Lucas in the passenger seat, red toolbox on his lap. Lucas had asked if he could come, and Rob had said yes, because this was part of it. Part of integrating the work with fatherhood. Part of showing Lucas what Rob did, what he was good at. They walked into the service bay together. Jessica was waiting. Next to a dark blue Boss 429 Mustang. She looked at Lucas, then at Rob. "Your son." He wanted to see Jessica crouch down to Lucas's eye level. "Hi, I'm Jessica." "I'm Lucas. That's a nice tool, boss. Thank you." "My mom gave it to me." Jessica glanced at Rob, who gave a small nod, and she understood. She's got good taste. Jessica stood back up. "The car's all yours." Rob walked to the Mustang, Lucas following close behind. Rob opened the hood, and Lucas stood on his toes to see inside. "What's wrong with it?" Lucas asked. "Don't know yet." Rob pulled out his stethoscope. "That's what we're here to find out." He began the diagnostic, placing the probe against the engine block, listening, moving systematically through the 47 points. Lucas watched, silent, focused. Jessica watched both of them, and thought about what Edward Cross had said at the exhibition. "You're building something important, passing it forward. That's legacy." She was watching legacy happen. Right here, in her service bay, Rob found the problem in 40 minutes. A resonance plate, similar to the one in the CUDA, but positioned differently and fractured in a different place. Same principle though, same solution. He looked at Jessica. "I can fix it, but I'll need to fabricate a replacement plate. I can do it at my shop. Have it ready by tomorrow evening." "That works." Rob closed the hood, looked at Lucas, ready to go. "Can I come back tomorrow when you fix it?" Rob looked at Jessica, who nodded. "Yeah, you can come back tomorrow." Lucas smiled. The first real smile Rob had seen in days, and as they walked to the truck, Lucas looked up at Rob. "Dad, this is cool." "Yeah," Rob said. "It is," and he meant it. Saturday morning, Rob and Lucas drove to Edward Cross's estate. It was on the outskirts of Richmond. A sprawling property with a main house and a separate garage. that was bigger than most people's houses. Edward met them at the door. 72, white hair, sharp eyes, and a smile that was genuine. "Rob, good to see you, Mr. Cross. This is my son, Lucas." Edward crouched down, shook Lucas's hand. "Lucas, your dad tells me you're learning the trade." "Yes, sir. Good man. Come on, I'll show you the cars." The garage was temperature controlled, climate stable, and held 14 vehicles. All high-performance American muscle cars, from the 60s and 70s, all modified by Raymond Castellano. Lucas's eyes went wide. Edward laughed. "I know, it's a lot." He looked at Rob. "Where do you want to start?" Rob walked down the line, looking at each car, assessing. He stopped at a 1970 Chevelle SS LS6 engine, 454 cubic inches. "This one," Edward nodded. "She's been running rough." "I'd like to know why." Rob opened the hood. Lucas climbed onto a step stool beside him and watched as Rob began the diagnostic. Edward stood back, watching, not interfering. And Rob worked, the way he always worked, methodical, patient, precise, until he found the problem. A hairline crack in a resonance chamber that Castellano had built into the intake manifold. Rob showed it to Edward, who looked impressed. "How long to fix it?" 2 weeks. "I'll need to fabricate a replacement chamber. Test it, install it. Take all the time you need." And so it began. The consulting work, the integration of past and present, the life Rob was building. That included Lucas, and the work, and the memory of Sarah, and the future, not separate, not competing, whole. Over the next 2 months, the pattern established itself. Weekdays, Rob ran Williams Auto Repair, oil changes, brake jobs, transmission work, the steady, reliable income that kept the lights on. Thursday evenings, he went to Heritage Classic to work on whatever Castellano car Jessica had brought in. Lucas came with him most times, watching, learning, asking questions. Saturdays, he drove to Edward's estate to work on the collection. Lucas always came, and Edward always had something for the boy to do. Cleaning tools, organizing parts, small tasks that made Lucas feel useful, important. And slowly, Rob started to feel like himself again. The brown leather notebook came off the shelf. He started adding to it. New observations, new measurements, new diagrams. Lucas got his own notebook, a smaller one, with a plain black cover, and he started taking notes too, in his 6-year-old handwriting, about what he saw, what he learned, what his dad taught him. And Rob would look at those notes sometimes, at night, after Lucas was asleep, and he would think about Sarah, and about the inscription in his own notebook, "For whoever comes after." Lucas was whoever came after. And the work was continuing, and Sarah would have been proud. In early December, Edward called Rob. "I have a proposition." Rob was under a Camaro, replacing a resonance chamber. He rolled out, answered the phone. "What kind of proposition?" "I want to fund the publication of your Castellano research." Rob sat up. "What? Your notebook? The thesis?" "Jessica told me about it. I want to fund its publication, as a technical manual, for collectors and restorers." "Edward, I don't. Hear me out. I'll cover all costs. Editing, layout, printing, distribution. You retain full creative control and full ownership of the material. I just want to make sure it exists, and that people can access it." Why? Edward's voice was quiet. "Because I'm 72 years old, and I've spent my whole life collecting things. Cars, art, antiques, things." He paused. "But you know what I haven't done? I haven't created anything. I haven't built anything that will outlast me." "Edward, you have a daughter, who I haven't seen in 9 months, who doesn't want my money or my advice, who wants me to be present, and I haven't been." There was a long silence. "Your research," Edward continued, "is something real, something valuable, something that will help people long after you and I are gone. Let me help you share it, please." Rob thought about Lucas, about the red toolbox, about Sarah's inscription, "For whoever comes after." He took a breath. Okay, yeah, let's do it." The process took 4 months. Rob rewrote sections, clarified diagrams, added photographs, organized the material into chapters. Edward hired an editor, a woman named Patricia Chen, who had worked on automotive technical manuals for 30 years, and who understood both the material and the audience. She was patient with Rob when he got stuck or frustrated or overwhelmed. "This is good work," she told him. After reading the first draft, "This is really good work. Don't doubt that." Lucas helped too, in his own way. He'd sit at the kitchen table while Rob worked, drawing cars, or doing homework, or just being there. And sometimes he'd ask questions about Castellano, about resonance, about why certain things mattered. And Rob would explain, and in explaining, he'd clarify his own thinking. and the manual would get better, on a Saturday in early March. The first printed copy arrived. Rob held it in his hands, a real book with a cover and pages, and his name on it, Acoustic Engineering in American Performance Vehicles. The Castellano Methodology by Robert Williams. Lucas was beside him, looking at it. "Is that your book?" "Yeah, can I see?" Rob handed it to him. Lucas opened it carefully, turned through the pages, and then he found the dedication page for Sarah, who believed in this work when I didn't, for Lucas, who reminded me why it mattered, and for Raymond Castellano, whose engines taught us that machines can sing. Lucas looked up at Rob, his eyes bright. "You put me in your book." "Of course I did." Lucas hugged him, hard. And Rob hugged him back, and thought about how strange it was, that the thing he'd been most afraid of, publishing the research, stepping into the light, had led to this moment, his son, holding a book with his name in it, knowing that he mattered, that he was part of something larger than himself. Edward hosted a launch event at his estate, a small gathering. Collectors, restorers, a few journalists from automotive publications. Rob didn't want to go, but Edward insisted, and Jessica insisted, and even Lucas insisted, so Rob went, in a suit he'd bought for the occasion, feeling awkward and out of place, until he started talking about the work. And then the awkwardness fell away, and he was just himself, explaining Castellano's approach, demonstrating harmonic resonance, answering technical questions, and people listened, really listened, because this wasn't just theory, this was practical knowledge, from someone who'd actually done the work, who'd fixed the cars, who understood the systems from the inside out. Afterward, a man approached Rob, late 50s, gray hair, confident bearing. "Robert Williams. That's me. I'm Jonathan Hayes. I run the automotive engineering program at Virginia Tech." Rob shook his hand. "Nice to meet you. I read your manual." Jonathan held up a copy. "It's brilliant. Absolutely brilliant. Thank you. I'd like to talk to you about something. We're developing a new curriculum focused on acoustic engineering principles in performance vehicles. And I'd like you to be involved. How? Guest lectures. Maybe a semester-long course. If you're interested, we'd work around your schedule." Rob's breath caught. I don't know if I'm qualified for that." Jonathan smiled. "You wrote the definitive text on Castellano's methodology. You've authenticated and restored more Castellano cars than anyone alive. You're the most qualified person I know." Rob looked across the room, at Lucas, talking to Edward, animated, happy, and he thought about Sarah, and the notebook, and the choices he'd made, and the doors that had opened because of them. "Let me think about it." "Of course." Jonathan handed him a card. "Call me when you're ready." And Rob took the card, and put it in his pocket, and thought, maybe he was ready. 3 months had passed since the book launch, and Lucas had turned 7 in February. A small party at the shop, with Eleanor and a few kids from school, and a chocolate cake that Rob had tried to make himself, and failed, so Eleanor had brought one instead. Lucas had opened his presents, a new set of calipers, a torque wrench calibrated to his smaller hands, a leather-bound notebook. For his own research, his own notes, he'd held the notebook, and looked at Rob, like yours, like mine, and Rob thought about Sarah's inscription, and his own, and the one Lucas would write someday. On a Saturday morning in late April, Rob and Lucas were at Edward's estate, working on a 1971 Plymouth GTX with a 440 cubic inch V8 that had developed an intermittent misfire. Rob had diagnosed it, a resonance chamber in the exhaust manifold, with a hairline fracture. So small you needed magnification to see it, but large enough to break the harmonic frequency and cause the misfire. He was fabricating the replacement now. On a portable workbench Edward had set up in the garage, Lucas beside him, watching every movement. Edward was there too, sitting in a chair near the GTX, watching them work, with the expression of someone who understands that what he's seeing is rare. "Lucas." Edward spoke quietly, but Lucas heard. "Yes, sir, your dad's teaching you all of this. The acoustic engineering, the resonance theory. All of it, yes, sir. Why do you think he's doing that?" Lucas thought about it, his small face serious, "Because he wants me to know what he knows, so I can keep doing it. After what?" Edward asked gently. Lucas looked at Rob, then back at Edward. "After I'm bigger. And he's older. Or if something happens." His voice got quieter. Like what happened to Mom, the garage went silent, except for the faint hum of the climate control system and the distant sound of birds outside. Rob set down his tools, turned to Lucas. "Hey, look at me." Lucas looked up, his eyes wet, but not crying. Not yet. Nothing's going to happen to me. You understand? I'm not going anywhere. You don't know that. Lucas's voice was small. Mom didn't know either. Rob crouched down. So he was eye level with his son. You're right, I don't know. Nobody knows. But I'm here now. And I'm healthy, and I'm careful, and I'm going to be here as long as I possibly can. He paused. But you're also right about something else. I'm teaching you this because I want you to know it. Not because I'm going anywhere. But because it's important. And because someday, whether it's 10 years from now or 50, you might want to pass it on to whoever comes after. The same way my dad passed it to me. And the same way I'm passing it to you. Lucas nodded slowly. Processing. Okay. Lucas wiped his eyes with the back of his hand and picked up a socket wrench from his metal toolbox. Can we keep working? Yeah, we can keep working, and they did. But Edward sat there for a long time afterward, watching them, thinking about his own daughter in Portland, whom he hadn't seen in 10 months now, and wondering if it was too late to fix that on a Tuesday afternoon. Jessica called. We have a situation. Rob had learned that when Jessica said situation, it meant problem. And when she said problem, it meant crisis. What kind of situation? Kelland wants to sell a Castellano car. 68 Charger RT, 440 Magnum. Buyer is flying in from Texas. Wants proof the engine is authentic Castellano work. And wants it running before he commits. When Friday Rob looked at the calendar, it was Tuesday. That gave him 3 days. Bring it over. You sure? Yeah. I'm sure. The Charger arrived Wednesday morning on a flatbed truck, dark green paint, black vinyl top, and an engine that hadn't fired in 6 months. Rob spent Wednesday diagnosing, Thursday fabricating, and Friday morning installing. Lucas was at school, so Rob worked alone, the way he used to. Before all this started, and he realized something. He missed having Lucas there, missed the questions, the observations, the quiet companionship 3 years ago. He'd wanted time alone, time to think, time to work without interruption. Now, the silence felt wrong, empty. He finished the installation at 2 p.m., closed the hood and stood back. Then he got in the driver's seat, turned the key. The 440 Magnum turned over, caught, and settled into a deep rumbling idle. That shook the whole car, in the way that only a Castellano-tuned engine could. Rob sat there, hands on the wheel, listening to it, feeling it, and thinking about how far he'd come. In 6 months, from a man who'd closed a notebook and walked away from everything, to a man who'd opened it again and stepped back in, on his own terms because he could, because Lucas had reminded him he was allowed to be happy. The buyer from Texas showed up at 4 p.m. with Jessica and a certified appraiser. Rob opened the hood, showed them the modifications, explained the acoustic engineering, demonstrated the harmonic resonance. The buyer listened, asked technical questions. Good questions, the kind that showed he understood what he was looking at. And then he asked the question Rob had been waiting for. How do I know this is authentic Castellano work? Rob reached into his back pocket and pulled out a folded photocopy of a page from the brown leather notebook. This is from my research on Raymond Castellano's methodology, documented over 3 years. While I was at Velocity Dynamics, he unfolded it, showed the buyer and the appraiser the modifications on this Charger match Castellano's signature approach, resonance chambers in the intake and exhaust, harmonic frequency calibration across all rotating assemblies, thermal isolation plates in the fuel delivery system. It's all here. The appraiser studied the page, then looked at the engine, then back at the page. This is extraordinary documentation. Rob nodded. I have 47 pages like this, all focused on Castellano's work, published now. In the manual, the buyer looked at Jessica, then at Rob. If I buy this car, can I hire you for ongoing maintenance? Rob considered. Then yeah. You can. The buyer smiled. Then we have a deal. They shook hands, and the sale went through. And Jessica walked the buyer and the appraiser back to their car. When she came back, Rob was closing the Charger's hood that just earned Heritage Classic a 6-figure commission. Good. Jessica leaned against the workbench. You know what you just did, right? Fist a car. No, you authenticated it. You proved its provenance with your research. That notebook you have, the published manual, it's not just educational. It's the definitive reference for Castellano's work. Rob looked at her. And collectors are going to need you. More and more. Not just for repairs, for authentication, for restoration consultation. This is going to grow. Rob thought about that, about what it meant for him, for Lucas, For the life he was building, I can handle it. I know you can. Jessica smiled. Just don't forget where you started. When it gets big, I won't. On a cold morning in early May, Rob drove to Virginia Tech. For his first guest lecture, he'd said yes to Jonathan. After thinking about it for 3 weeks, and talking it through with Lucas, and with Edward, and even with Jessica. And now he was here, walking into a lecture hall, with 40 engineering students, waiting to hear him talk about Castellano's methodology. Rob set up his laptop, connected it to the projector, and pulled up his slides. And then he looked at the students. Young faces, eager, curious, and he thought about his father, teaching him, in the two-bay shop in Richmond, 40 years ago, and about Sarah, who'd believed in him, even when he didn't believe in himself, and about Lucas, who'd given him permission to be whole, and he started talking, about resonance, about harmony, about the way Castellano had understood engines not as machines, but as instruments, and the students listened, and asked questions, and took notes, and Rob realized something. This was teaching, real teaching. The kind that mattered, not just passing on information, but passing on understanding, on perspective, on a way of seeing the world the same way his father had taught him, and the same way he was teaching Lucas after the lecture. A student approached, a young woman, early 20s, bright eyes, Professor Williams. I'm not a professor, just Rob, she smiled. Rob, that was incredible. I've never heard anyone explain acoustic engineering like that. Thank you. I'm working on my thesis, on harmonic resonance in electric vehicle powertrains. Would you be willing to look at it? Give me feedback. Rob thought about his own thesis, the one that had never been finished. Until now, yeah, I'd be happy to. She handed him her email address and thanked him and walked away. And Rob stood there, in the empty lecture hall, holding a piece of paper with a student's email address, and thinking about how strange it was that the work he'd tried to bury had become the work that connected him to the future. Over the next month, Rob gave 3 more lectures at Virginia Tech, each one on a different aspect of Castellano's methodology, and each time, students approached him afterward, with questions, with thesis ideas, with genuine curiosity about the work, and Rob found himself enjoying it, the teaching, the exchange of ideas, the sense that he was contributing to something larger than himself. Lucas came with him to one of the lectures, sat in the back row, with his red toolbox on his lap, and his black notebook open, and afterward, a student asked Lucas what he thought. Lucas looked up at the student, 7 years old, serious. My dad's really good at this. You should listen to him, the student smiled. I am. And Rob stood there, watching his son, and thinking about legacy, and what it meant, and how it was built one small moment at a time. On a Saturday afternoon in late May, Rob and Lucas were at Edward's estate. Edward had called them in to check on the progress of the Chevelle, which Rob had been working on for the past month. But when they arrived, Edward wasn't in the garage. He was in the main house, on the phone, and when he hung up, his face was different, lighter. Younger Lucas, thank you for coming. Of course, everything okay, better than okay. That was my daughter, Rebecca, the one in Portland. Edward nodded. I called her 3 weeks ago, and we talked, really talked for the first time in years. He paused, his eyes wet, and she's coming to visit next month, with her husband and my grandson, who I've never met. Rob felt something warm spread through his chest. Edward, that's incredible, she said. She was proud of me, for reaching out, for being honest, for wanting to be present. Edward looked at Rob, then at Lucas. I wouldn't have done that without seeing you two. The way you are together, the way you've built something real. Out of loss, he shook his head. You reminded me what matters, and I'm grateful. Lucas walked over to Edward, looked up at him. I'm glad you called her Mr. Cross. Edward crouched down, looked Lucas in the eye. Me too. Lucas, me too. And Rob stood there, watching and thinking about choices and second chances and the way people can change when they decide it's worth it. Later that day, as Rob and Lucas were packing up to leave, Edward pulled Rob aside. I want to show you something. He led Rob to a small office off the main garage and opened a drawer. Inside was a leather-bound notebook, similar to Rob's, but older, more worn. This was Raymond Castellano's, Edward said quietly. His personal research notebook. From the 1970s and 80s, Rob stared at it. How did you? I bought it at an estate sale 5 years ago. I've been trying to find someone who could understand it, who could do something with it. He handed it to Rob. I want you to have it, Edward. I can't. You can. And you should, because you're the only person I know who will appreciate what's in there, and who will use it. To keep the work going, Rob opened the notebook carefully and saw Castellano's handwriting, diagrams, equations, notes, decades of research. His breath caught. This is incredible. Study it. Learn from it. Maybe write a second manual, or donate it to a museum. I don't know, but it should be with you. Rob looked at Edward, then at the notebook, then back at Edward. Thank you. Edward smiled. Thank you for reminding me what legacy actually means. 3 days after Christmas, Jessica called. Happy holidays. Happy holidays. What's up? I have news. Good news. Good news. I think Rob waited. Heritage Classic is expanding. We're opening a restoration division, focused specifically on high-performance American muscle cars, with an emphasis on historically accurate work. That's great. And I want you to head it. Rob went still. What head of restoration? 3 days a week. Competitive salary. Full benefits. You'd have a team, a budget, and full autonomy over the work. Jessica. I have my shop. I know, and you can keep it. This would be in addition. You'd work Monday through Wednesday at Heritage Classic, the other days at your shop, and you'd bring Lucas when you want. We'd make it work. Rob's mind raced. Why me? Because you're the best. And because I trust you. And because you understand that this work isn't just about fixing cars. It's about preserving history and honoring the people who built these machines. She paused. My father forgot that. I won't. And I need someone who won't either. Rob thought about it, about what it would mean. For him, for Lucas, for the work. Can I think about it? Of course, take all the time you need. But Rob already knew his answer. He just needed to talk to Lucas first, that night, after dinner. Rob and Lucas sat on the back step. I got a job offer today. What kind of job? Head of restoration at Heritage Classic Motors, 3 days a week. Leading a team, preserving classic cars. Lucas thought about it. Would you still have the shop? Yeah, I'd still have the shop. Would I still come with you? To work? Yeah. You'd still come with me? Then you should do it. You sure, Dad? Lucas looked at him. You're really good at this, and people need you, lots of people. He paused. And you like it, I can tell. You smile more. When you do this work, Rob pulled him close, his throat tight. Yeah, I do, so do it. Okay. I will. They sat there for a while longer. In the cold December air, watching their breath fog, listening to the quiet, and Rob thought about the year that had passed. Since that Thursday night, when Jessica had walked into his shop and asked for help, everything had changed. He was still Lucas's father, first and always, but now he was also himself, whole, integrated, carrying the past forward into the future. On New Year's Eve, Rob called Jessica. I'll take the job. He could hear the smile in her voice. Good. When can you start? February 1st. That gives me time to hire someone to help at the shop. Part-time, to cover the days I'm at Heritage Classic. Perfect. There was a pause. Then Jessica said something unexpected. Thank you. Rob, for what? For saying yes. For trusting me. For being exactly who you are. Rob didn't know what to say to that, so he just said, you're welcome, after he hung up. He stood in the quiet shop and looked around at the tools on the walls, at the lift, at the workbench, at the brown leather notebook, face out on the shelf, next to Lucas's black one, next to Castellano's worn leather one. 3 generations of knowledge, side by side. And he thought about his father, who'd run this shop for 40 years, and about Sarah, who'd believed in him, and about Lucas, who'd reminded him he was allowed to be happy, and about Edward, and Jessica, and Jonathan, and Patricia, and all the people who'd helped him. Along the way, this is it. This is the life I was meant to live, not the one I planned, but the one I built, from loss, and grief, and love, and work, and it was enough. On a bright morning in February, Rob walked into Heritage Classic Motors for his first day. As head of restoration, he had an office, with window, and a desk, and a nameplate, Robert Williams. Head of restoration, he looked at it, and shook his head, and smiled. His team was small, 3 technicians, all younger than him, all eager, all willing to learn. He gathered them in the restoration bay, introduced himself, explained his approach. We're not just fixing cars, we're preserving history, honoring the people who built these machines, and making sure their work outlasts them. The technicians nodded, listening. And we do it right. No shortcuts, no compromises. If we can't do it authentically, we don't do it at all. He paused. Questions. One of the technicians, a young man named David, raised his hand. What's the first project? Rob smiled and pulled a tarp off a car in the corner. Underneath was a 1971 Plymouth Cuda, vitamin C orange. With a 426 Hemi V8, Edward crosses car. The one Rob had fixed 10 months ago, Edward wants a full restoration. Engine, transmission, suspension, interior, paint, everything. Back to original Castellano specifications. Rob looked at his team. Think we can do it. They nodded. Eyes bright. Then let's get to work, and they did, 3 months later. On a warm evening in May, Rob stood on a small stage. At a bookstore in downtown Richmond, the bookstore had hosted a reading for acoustic engineering in American performance vehicles. And about 60 people had shown up, ploclax, restorers, students. A few journalists. Rob had read a section from the manual about Castellano's approach to harmonic frequency, and then he'd answered questions. And now, at the end, someone asked a question he'd been waiting for. What's next? Are you working on anything new? Rob thought about Castellano's notebook, the one Edward had given him, that he'd been studying for months. Yeah, I'm working on something, a follow-up, on the evolution of Castellano's methodology. How his approach changed over 3 decades, what we can learn from it. He paused. And I'm working on something else too, a teaching manual, on how to pass on this kind of knowledge to the next generation, because it's not enough to do the work yourself. You have to make sure someone else can do it too. After you're gone. The audience nodded, understanding, and as Rob stepped off the stage, Lucas was there, waiting, 7 years old now, serious, focused. You did good, Dad, thanks. Buddy, when's your book coming out, the teaching one? Rob laughed. I haven't even started writing it yet, but you will. Yeah, I will. They walked out together, into the warm spring evening, and Rob thought about time, and legacy, and the things that outlast us on a Sunday morning in June. Rob and Lucas were in the shop, working on a personal project, a 1970 Dodge Challenger RT that Rob had bought 8 months ago, as a long-term restoration for Lucas. When you turn 16, Rob had told him, this will be yours. Lucas had stared at the car, eyes wide. Really, really. And now they were working on it together, slowly, methodically, no rush, pulling the engine, rebuilding it, from the ground up, with Castellano's principles, and Rob's knowledge, and Lucas's growing skill. It would take years. Rob knew that, but that was okay, because the work wasn't just about the car, it was about the time, together, the lessons, the conversations, the moments that build a life. Lucas was under the hood, examining the cylinder heads. Rob beside him, Dad, look at this. What, this casting mark? It's different from the others. Rob leaned in, looked. Lucas was right. One of the cylinder heads had a different casting mark, which meant it had been replaced at some point. With a non-original part, good eye, Lucas beamed, pride lighting up his face. We'll need to find the right replacement. Rob continued. Original casting. Correct date code. It'll take some time.
That's okay.
We have time. Yeah, we do. And as they worked, Rob thought about his father, teaching him, in this same shop, decades ago, and about Sarah, who would never see Lucas grow up, but whose love was still here, in the red toolbox, in the way Rob loved their son, and about Lucas, who would carry all of it forward, into whatever future he chose. The work continues. Later that afternoon, Kenneth Porter showed up at Williams Auto Repair. Rob was surprised to see him. It had been almost a year since the incident at Heritage Classic. Since the demotion, Kenneth stood in the doorway of the bay, looking uncertain, uncomfortable. Rob, can I talk to you for a minute? Rob wiped his hands on a shop rag. Yeah, come in. Kenneth walked in, looked around, at the tools, the lift, the organization. Nice shop. Thanks. Kenneth took a breath. I wanted to apologize for what I said last year at Heritage Classic to you and your son. Rob waited. I was wrong, Kenneth continued. Wrong to dismiss you, wrong to judge you based on clothes and appearance, wrong to treat you like you didn't belong there. He paused. You're the best engineer I've ever met, and I was too arrogant to see it until it was too late. Rob looked at him, studied him, and saw something different. Humility, genuine regret. Apology accepted. Kenneth's shoulders relaxed. Thank you. How are things at Heritage Classic? Getting better. Michael Torres is a good supervisor, patient, teaching me things I should have learned years ago, about listening, about admitting when you don't know something. Good. Kenneth looked at Lucas, who was watching from the corner, with the red toolbox on his lap. That your son? Yeah. That's Lucas. Kenneth walked over, crouched down. I owe you an apology too. What I said last year, about you not belonging. That was wrong. You belong anywhere you want to be. You understand? Lucas looked at his father, then back at Kenneth. Okay. Kenneth stood up, nodded to Rob, and left. And Rob stood there, thinking about apologies, and second chances, and the way people can grow, if they're willing to try. Lucas came over, stood beside Rob. He seems different, yeah, he does. People can change, yeah, they can. On a Sunday evening in late June, Rob and Lucas were in the backyard, sitting on the step, watching the maple tree in full leaf. Lucas was turning his toy screwdriver over in his hands. The one from the red toolbox, the one Sarah had given him. Dad, can I ask you something? Always. Do you think Mom would be proud of us? Rob's chest ached. He looked at Lucas, 7 years old now. Growing so fast. Yeah, I think she would be, even though we don't have pictures of her everywhere, like some people do. Rob thought about that, about the photograph he kept in his desk drawer, about the way he'd tried to protect Lucas from the grief, by hiding it, instead of sharing it. You know what? We should change that, Cham. What? We should put up pictures. In the shop, in the house, places where we can see her, and remember her every day. Lucas looked up at him. Really, Lucas was quiet for a moment. Then I think that would be good, me too. They sat there for a while longer, as the sun set, and the air got cooler, and the maple tree swayed gently in the evening breeze. And Rob thought about the manual, and Edward's offer, and Jonathan's invitation, and Jessica's position, and all the ways his life had changed. In a year and a half, from a man hiding from his past, to a man integrating it, with his present, with his future. Lucas leaned against him. Dad, I'm glad you're doing the important work again. Me too, buddy, me too. And as the darkness came, and the streetlights flickered on, Rob held his son, and thought about Sarah, and about the inscription in the notebook, for whoever comes after. Lucas was whoever came after, and the work was continuing, and the legacy was building, one day at a time, one lesson at a time, one moment at a time, and that was enough. On a warm morning in early July, Rob and Lucas walked into the shop together. Lucas was carrying both toolboxes now, the red plastic one in his left hand, the metal one in his right, and Rob was carrying Castellano's notebook, along with his own, and Lucas's 3 generations of knowledge, ready for another day of work. They had a Camaro to finish. For a client who'd been waiting 3 weeks, they had Edward's GTX to check. After the resonance chamber replacement, they had the Challenger to work on. Slowly, together, for Lucas's future, and they had time, together, which was the most important thing. Rob opened the bay door, and the morning light flooded in. Lucas set down his toolboxes and climbed onto his stool, and opened his black notebook. Redidi. Rob asked Redidi, and they began, father and son, teacher and student. Past and future, the work continued, the legacy built, and in the quiet morning light, with the tools hung in their exact places, and the floor swept clean, and the notebooks open on the workbench, everything was exactly as it should be.